Um, my dad and I were about as different as they came. He had a logical mind suited for math and science. I had a creative mind that favored English, writing, and theater. In high school, he was class president and star football player. I was a social outcast, an uncoordinated klutz. He was a straight A student. I struggled to earn B's in some classes. My dad loved Westerns and hated game shows. I love game shows and hate Westerns. He was a staunch conservative. He once described me as a flaming liberal. It seemed like I gave my dad every possible reason to be disappointed in how I turned out. My dad wasn't like that. He didn't care if I agreed with him or followed in his footsteps or lived the way he did. He didn't care that I wasn't an athlete. He went to all my brother's football games, but he came to see me in my high school theater productions and always told me I did a good job. He didn't care that I wasn't a straight A student. He just wanted me to get good enough grades to go to college, so he spent many long nights tutoring me on math and science, my most difficult subjects. He didn't care that I went to college at the University of Alabama, even though everyone in our family were rabid Auburn fans. He just wanted me to get a good education. You see, what mattered to my dad was pleasing others, not himself. I can't tell you how many times he took me to places he absolutely didn't want to be. A Boy Scout camping trip, a Hall & Oates concert, amusement parks with dizzying rides. The last movie I ever watched with him in the theaters before the pandemic was Won't You Be My Neighbor, a documentary about Mr. Rogers, a man he knew little about and who hosted a kids show he had never watched. But he went to see the movie because I wanted to. My dad was one of the most selfless and generous men I ever knew. He grew up poor, an only child who had to work at his family grocery store to help keep his family afloat. There were many bad Christmases and birthdays where his parents couldn't afford to buy him any nice gifts. He never wanted that for his kids. So he worked his butt off through college, got an engineering degree at Georgia Tech, joined the US Army, and got recruited to work for NASA as an engineer during the early days of the US space program. He stayed there for 40 years. He earned a comfortable salary, enough where my mom could stay home, and we could still afford a nice house, 2 cars, and a lot of great toys from Santa. His generosity continued as he paid for my high school trip to Europe, a place he'd never been himself, and most of my college education. When I decided to go into the not so lucrative career of print journalism, he supported me 100%. I was paid barely more than minimum wage during my first newspaper job in Natchez, Mississippi. But he didn't want me to live in a sketchy apartment, so he sent me $100 a month to subsidize my rent. If I hadn't had his help, I might have left journalism early on, because after all, who wants to go broke? Fortunately, I climbed my way up to better paying jobs, always with the support of my parents, helping me move from one city to the next. I've been a journalist for 28 years now, and in 2019, I was a lead writer on a South Florida Sun Sentinel team that won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service, the highest journalism honor there is. My dad told me how proud he was of me and how I had definitely found my calling. There's a time, though, that I doubted his unconditional support. You see, my dad was a traditional conservative Christian man, and I got the sense he never wanted a gay son. Well, he got one, but I didn't tell him for a long time. I worried that if he knew, it would destroy him. I worried he'd never help me out financially, that he'd never welcome me back into his house again. Talk about irrational fears. You know what he said when I finally came out to him 25 years ago? He said, I love you, and nothing is going to change that. And he was right. Nothing did. My dad loved his family unconditionally. Family was everything to him, far more than the impressive NASA career he had, which he rarely talked about. After he retired, I was hoping my mom and dad would use the free time to travel, but the only place he wanted to go was to Atlanta to see Don and to Florida to see David, me, and his grandkids. My dad lived by the Bible verse, it's better to give than receive. He loved giving gifts, but man, he was hard to buy for. He never seemed to want anything. When David and I cleaned out his room this week, we found tons of never used shirts, wallets, socks, and gift cards. I called my dad on his 85th birthday on February 4th, 2 days before he died. I asked him if he'd gotten any nice gifts. He said, I got a call from you. That was my dad, loving, generous, and wonderful. I'll miss you, Dad.